The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Mike, we're back with another episode of The Unlikely Innovators. Every time I'm about to become a nerd about something, I announce it, and I really got to stop doing that. But today was about Nortel and semiconductors. So everyone's going to have to bear with us. But today we were obviously joined by Sylvain Charbonneau, who is the president and CEO of CFI. Canada Foundation for Innovation, and it was just really good to catch up with him 2.5 months in on the job.
Yeah, no, it's great to be a stop on his Canada-wide research tour. And again, I think you're being too harsh on yourself, because we deliberately asked him that question. It wasn't a side trip. Typically, when you go on these side quests of yours, we see the inner geek of Steve. It's either a business geek or a semiconductor geek in this case, but. I think you saw how passionate he was talking about it, right? And I think that's probably the most I've learned about semiconductors. There was a book that we had partially read a few years ago when we had that author of the book on the podcast, and I told him I didn't read his whole book.
Partially read? What you're telling on yourself?
Well, I told on myself in that episode with Dan Bresnitz.
Right.
And and there's a whole chapter opening about like Taiwan being, the hub now, and what opportunities have come by being a semiconductor hub, right? But I think the way that he was able to distill that in that answer was great. And I think any listener, from somebody like me who thought a semiconductor was somebody who worked part-time on a train, to somebody like you who obviously lives and breathes this stuff, I think he did a great job. But certainly I think his insights into the research landscape in Canada, I think having him at the helm is a great choice, because he has the research background, he has the business background, he's got the university background. And so I think having him come in, hopefully getting some more levers for the colleges to pull on. Again, the college fund is great, and I think we'll definitely be looking at other opportunities to get some funding in there.
Get your fingers ready for some grant writing. That's always fun. Anyway, maybe we'll leave it there and we'll go right to Sylvain Charbonneau. All right, and we're so pleased to be back with Sylvain Charbonneau, who is the 6th president and CEO of the Canada Foundation for Innovation, as of October 1st, 2024. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you very much for hosting us.
Yeah, and we had a little tour before this, so we were getting to know Sylvain very well.
Yep.
He's a former researcher, entrepreneur, and leader in research administration, and we're so happy to have you on. One of the things we do, so we kind of creep you on LinkedIn, and we try and find out little tidbits about what your background is. And based on your background, the name of the show is The Unlikely Innovators, but it doesn't seem like it's that unlikely at all that you'd be the chief officer for a research infrastructure funding organization. But can you sort of trace that journey from sort of academia to industry to where you are now for us, please?
So thank you very much for the question, Steve. So listen, born and raised in Montreal, did not know a single word of English, exiled myself to Ontario, to the only bilingual university I knew at the time, which was the University of Ottawa. I did my bachelor's degree in physics, but more importantly, I also learned English as my second language. And once this was mastered, I went to Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, to get my PhD in solid-state physics. Studied spectroscopy of semiconductors, mostly 3-5 compound semiconductors like gallium arsenide and others. After that, I had an incline for both industrial innovation and also fundamental research at universities. Not knowing exactly which path I should be taking, I went to the middle path, which was going to the National Research Council of Canada. It was supposed to be a 2-year journey, which ended up being much, much longer. And I did research at the National Research Council, did very fundamental research. That was back in 1988. People talk about quantum technologies today. Well, I was doing quantum optics back in 1988. So quantum is old stories for me. But also that was very fundamental, but also did very applied research with companies that existed at the time, such as Nortel Network, Northern Telecom, Bell Northern Research, which was their research arm at the time, and looking into technologies that would put more bits into a single mode fibers. That was before the internet started growing quite rapidly. So I was midpoint between fundamental research. I had adjunct professorship at 6 Canadian universities. Mm-hmm. I had graduate students on one side of the lab, and the other side was really mostly industrial partnership with industry, of course. And After that, I decided to spin off a company. So I was one of 4 founders, and our applications was really fiber to the home. We did diplexers and triplexers for fiber to the home applications. I was the CTO and founder, and was also responsible for, well, developing the technology, of course, but I was doing the dog and pony show, as we call it. So I was on the red eye between Ottawa and California quite regularly, attracting some investment from the private sector. And we grew up to be about 50-some employees at the company. And then NRC came back calling because they were putting together a very large cluster initiative for Ontario. And they asked me to lead the charge, and that was to put together the first pure play foundry in semiconductor in Canada. And that's what I did for 10 years. And having done industry, having done government, I think my next path was going to be universities, academia. And the vice president of the University of Ottawa at the time was Mona Niemer, and I joined her team as associate vice president. And she left very soon after, and I then became vice president of research and innovation at the University of Ottawa. So I've done government lab, research and innovation, having done industry, having done academia. The last thing left was really a foundation. And this is what I did on October 1st of this year in 2024. So that's my professional path through the various stops that I did.
We rarely get that good of a chronology from our guests.
Yeah.
That was very good. Usually, that was very succinct, and I really appreciate the.
Do you want me to keep going?
No. Wow. I mean, do you predict the future too? Then.
No, one of the things that jumped out at me, because it just made me think of, I think your purposeful approach to going to University of Ottawa to learn English. We had these 2 students before the pandemic, and they were twins from Hearst, which anyone knows it's a very francophone community. And they were great because one was on the electrical side and one was in machining. So the 2 of them together were this perfect combination where we had both. And I remember there was one time when I asked them, well, why didn't you guys go to Collège Boreal? Like, it's just down the street. And they said, we came here because we want to be more proficient in English.
Yep.
And, and we brought them out to when CICAN used to do the student showcase on the Hill.
Yeah.
We brought them out there, took them out of their comfort zone. They were doing the presentations in French and English. But again, I thought that's it's a pretty bold move to do that, right? As somebody myself, I've been trying to learn French to immerse yourself into that and take that plunge is commendable.
I drank from the water hose, like we say, right back in second year, because first year was all in French at the University of Ottawa in physics. Second year was half and half, and third and fourth year was all in English. And most of my prof at the time were all from England. And, a French Canadian trying to understand very thick British and Scottish accent it was not easy.
Yeah. It's
But
hard,
I survived.
It's hard enough to understand English-speaking Canadians sometimes, and then you throw on the British accent, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you did a great job. And, we wanted to ask you before we talk about CFI, because we're going to get there, but, having started a company yourself, and now that you're at the foundation, can you talk a bit about how important it is, as somebody who's been on the industry side, to have research infrastructure available to help companies accelerate their technology development timelines?
I think it's absolutely critical, right? So the CFI started in 1997, as you might know, so we're 27 years in the making. And we've invested, along with partners, because we only provide like 40 cents on the dollars on these different programs that we have, a total of, with the $11 billion that we put in, we've leveraged up to $26 billion to date, right? So that's quite a strong foundation.
Yeah.
On the industrial side of things, I think for me what is key, and you will see this in the last call in the Innovation Fund 2025, there is a theme which is called core facilities themes. So having spun off a company myself, right? It's, you can go and get some private investment from the private sector coming through, right? But to go and buy the space that I was in the manufacturing of semiconductor chips. It's a very expensive endeavor to go and get some growth system and to go and get some etchers and PECVDs, and each one of these acronyms is millions of dollars to purchase, right? So having access to these equipment was a lifesaver for us. Okay, so I had the privilege of having access to these very expensive pieces of equipment, which were located in universities, in colleges, and at the National Research Council. Of course, we would utilize this ourselves, or the technicians of the facilities would be utilizing this and doing the processes that we were asking for at a fee, of course, an industrial fee that would be billed to our companies on a monthly basis. So that was, to us, a very important endeavor, a life-saving endeavor, in fact, because it's very difficult to go and purchase a $2 million etcher when you're starting a company. So having access to this was extremely important for us.
Yeah, and I think private equity investors don't love it when one of your first uses for their money is capital that depreciates, right? So
That's
I
right.
think it's important for the government to step in and help in those ways.
So that was, the word that I like to use is the ability to de-risk these technologies and de-risk these investment for us was extremely important. And that's what led to the creation of the Canadian Photonics Fabrication Center at the National Research Council. But I'll talk about that maybe later.
Sounds good. A finer point on CFI: it funds universities and colleges and national laboratories. You were in the university research for most of your career so far. What have you learned in your somewhat short time so far at CFI, and even in the rest of your career, about the importance and value of college applied research? Maybe you could reflect a little bit on that.
Yep. So like I said, I've only started my job 2.5 months ago.
Yeah.
I've started to do the Cross Canada listening tour, and it brought me the privilege of meeting leaders in both universities, hospitals, and also colleges. So you're the fourth college. Cambrian is the fourth college that I'm visiting here.
That's good. High on the list.
In Canada.
Yep.
And what attracts my attention on the college side of things, of course, is the linkages that all the colleges have with the private sector. And that to me is very important. Coming from my background, right? I mean, the lens that I bring to the ecosystem is this interaction between universities and colleges and the private sector. And as you might know, there is a change in the federal government system with regards to funding research. Okay, so there will be a new organization that will be put in place called the Capstone that will be overarching the Tri-Council, and the CFI will be arm's length to this organization, but it will become much more important looking at mission-driven type research. And I think the interaction with the various federal departments, the various industrial sector companies that would come and support the research endeavor in this country. So to me, what I really like about the colleges is your interaction that you have in different sectors, right? I mean, I was in Trois-Rivières. They talk about the Centre de Métallurgie that we call here, very much about critical elements. The mining industry is very important. So to me, this is key. And of course, the CFI funds infrastructure that would help you build even more those linkages that you've made with those market segments.
Yeah, I think in the name itself, it really does provide that foundation for a lot of that research, to get the equipment, to get the research infrastructure. I think that's what's allowed us to accelerate our service offerings to our partners here in Sudbury, is just be able to get funding from other agencies that look at that, like FedNor and NHFC locally, but CFI has been a huge boon for us, obviously, with our EV lab that you saw moments ago.
Spectacular,
So,
absolutely spectacular. If you have never had the chance to see this, I will encourage people to come and see your EV lab. It's really state of the art, and I can see why industrial partners would come here and do business with you. I think it's important.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. So that's we'll have to have you back for another tour once we've got some cool stuff going on in there. We've got some cool stuff now, but more to come in the future.
For sure.
Yep.
I know that you mentioned you've only been at the helm for 2.5 months, so you can still use the "I'm new here." But so we have you here talking to us right now within your first 100 days.
Yep.
So I don't want to necessarily do the crystal ball question for you because you're still obviously drinking from a fire hose. But what is your, if you could reflect on the last 2.5 months, what is your goal? What is your vision for CFI moving forward as you kind of get your feet under you and fully understand the landscape that you guys are supporting?
So like I mentioned earlier, the CFI has been in business for the last 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
We've put a significant amount of infrastructure nationally. Like I said, $26 billion worth with partners, et cetera, right? So we have a very good foundation as to where we are today. I mentioned that there will be a fairly important change happening in the way research is being funded nationally, and we have to be mindful of how we're going to be connecting into this with the Tri-Council. We talk about ANSERC and SHRC and CIHR earlier, right? Mm-hmm. We're at the center of it all, right? I mean, the first thing that you need to do is you need to have, in the case of maybe not the social sciences as much, but you need to put the infrastructure in place, the equipment in place in order to do your research, your innovations, and helping third parties, your stakeholders, et cetera. So that's something that is going to be still maintained to be core for the CFI. Earlier this year, we received a mandate letter from Minister Champagne from Innovation, Science and Economic Development. And one of the things that he's asking the CFI to do is to start looking at major research facilities in Canada. So we have a program called MSI, Major Science Initiative within the CFI, which is a fairly important portfolio for us. We have 19 MSI in the country. A first wave of these will be 6 identified the largest of these infrastructure. Snow Lab, so we're in Sudbury today, so late tomorrow I'm going to be going to visit Snow Lab, which I'm looking forward to, of course. It's one of our unique facilities in Canada, in fact in the world, and it's part of these 6 major research facilities that the federal government would like to start looking at, and how we're going to be looking at putting this into a portfolio of large infrastructures across our country. So right now the team at CFI is looking into putting that framework together, looking at the life cycles of all of these equipment that has gone on for decades, if you wish, in many of these research national infrastructure. So that's something that will keep us busy at least for the next couple of years, and then go with a full report to the federal government in about 2 years from now. So that's something that will be important for us. As I mentioned, I think the linkages with the industrial innovation will also be very important for us moving forward. So looking at rolling out some programs, we have a very strong baseline already, as I mentioned, but rolling out some program like the College Fund that we have with the colleges across the country, in strong linkages with the industrial sector, I think they're going to continue to be very important. And maybe encouraging universities to do the same with the core facilities that I mentioned earlier of our Innovation Fund 2025. So that's something that will be also top of mind moving forward for the CFI.
So important. I mean, I know that every time we meet with any of our PIs or any of our lead researchers, one of the first things on their list is research infrastructure. And if we've had really good time so far with CFI, and I think as you could tell, there'll be more asks coming from us in the future. But it's just really important that the government has taken steps like that to look at infrastructure and continue to roll that out. I think it's such an important piece of our competitiveness nationally. I'm a bit of a business geek sometimes, and I really like...
Just a geek, I think.
Yeah, maybe just a geek, yeah. See, I told you there's going to be bullying. I used to work with 4 or 5 guys when I worked at OCE that used to be at Nortel.
Oh, yeah.
And, they'd tell really cool stories about, the good, the bad, and the ugly about working at really what was one of Canada's first unicorns when it comes to the tech sector. And you have a background in semiconductors, and Nortel and semiconductors are spoken of, sort of synonymously with Ottawa and that sort of Canada area, right? And Ottawa is a hub for semiconductor activity, and Maybe for the folks out there that don't really like, is Semiconductor a rock band? Or, like maybe some of the folks that might not know, how important are semiconductors to the country's economy, maybe the region's economy in North America, and even from a national security supply chain perspective? You could just wax poetic, if you will, on any of what I just said.
So how much time do we have?
Yeah, fair enough.
So you know that following the pandemic, right, President Biden invoked the Chip and Science Act in the United States of America in order to repatriate, if you wish, the supply chain for semiconductors. So semiconductors comes in different flavors, right? The audience will know about semiconductors like in silicon. So silicon is at the heart of anything electronics, right? It's in your laptop, it's in your phone, or your tablets, it's in your TV remote, it's on your TVs, it's everywhere, right? Silicon probably dominates like 98% of the world market. A single silicon fab today, state-of-the-art fab, okay, in the nanometer scale, is north of $10 billion for a single fab, right? I mentioned earlier that the National Research Council back in 2001, 2002, asked me to lead a very large effort in semiconductors to put together the only pure play foundry, and I mentioned 3-5 compound semiconductors. So that's a different type of semiconductors, one which is maybe less known from your listeners. And 3-5 semiconductors, and I will just mention a few: indium phosphide, gallium arsenide, gallium nitride, are some of these semiconductors. And semiconductors is much more than just microelectronics. I mean, it's photonics. In fact, the whole World Wide Web is fed through little pulses of light going through single mode fibers to transport massive amount of data. Okay, so you will have the wireless, of course, which is dominated by silicon, but also other semiconductors of higher power, higher frequency type application like gallium arsenide. But at the photonics level, at this, transporting a lot of data in single mode fibers, and this is where Nortel was the best company in the world back in the 90s. I mean, they hold 85% of the world market for wavelength division multiplexing, the ability to put many different wavelength of lights into single mode fibers. And this is where the internet exploded, right? I mean, the World Wide Web just went totally crazy and all of that. And Nortel captured 85% of the world market. That was great for Canada, right? Mm-hmm. But semiconductors is even more than that, right? Semiconductors goes and feed in your, we talk about LEDs, light emitting diode. Well, at the heart of the LEDs are semiconductors. And we talked today about, EVs, electric vehicle. Well, believe it or not, right? If you want to have good applications with semiconductors in electric vehicle, you need semiconductors that will be able to take large voltages, large current, harsh environment. We talked about the mining industry earlier. You said that many of these vehicles will work at plus 40 degrees C underground, right? And it just so happened that semiconductors like gallium nitride, which is a 3-5, if you look at your periodic table, gallium is group 3 and nitride is a group 5, or gallium and arsenide group 5, indium and phosphide group 3 and 5 in the periodic table. Silicon is group 4, like germanium. And you can make transistors and chips out of gallium nitride, which will be much more performance for any EV vehicle. Not only in mining, but also EV vehicles for everyday use on the roads, right? So why? Because they can handle very harsh environment and very large voltage and current. So those are 3-5 compound semiconductors. So I do thrive in that type. I did thrive in that type of environment when I was doing my research and collaborating very closely with companies like JDS Uniphase and Nortel Network or Bell Norton Research in developing these kinds of facilities. But at the core in Canada, so Canada will not, and maybe that's my crystal ball, will not play very well in putting a silicon CMOS fab at 10, 12, $15 billion a pop here in Canada. We just don't have the core facilities or the the know-how to do this at a Canadian level. And even people say the Americans have lost this. I mean, all of this now is done in Taiwan at TSMC and UMC and these companies, right? But they're trying to repatriate these fabrication facilities in the United States, and they're going to do so, right? I mean, they're capable of doing this. But in Canada, the niche play that we can have is all in these 3-5 compound semiconductors. So that's either microelectronics, electronics, or in the photonics side of things, like I mentioned. And the final portion of this, of course, is you can also use semiconductors for making microelectromechanical systems. They're called MEMS, okay? So you need semiconductor equipment to be etching and depositing materials, oxide and nitrides, in order to make actuators and things along that line. And that's also done quite well here in Canada in some of the facilities in Bromont, for example. So that's a bit of a rundown. That's a bit of a rundown of the semiconductors.
Honestly, we could put that in a box and like that. That's a really good rundown. That's really, really good. Yeah, and I think it's a point of pride, I suppose, that a lot of people don't know about that kind of work's happening in Canada.
Yeah, no, and Canada is a leader when it comes down to, because of the historical background that you've raised yourself, Steve. Nortel was more than a unicorn. It was a dominant companies in the world pushing these kinds of innovation through, right? I mean, their business expenditure in R&D at Nortel alone was more than the rest of Canada, right? I mean, they invested a significant amount of money into that space. And we do have very strong engineers and scientists which studied under that umbrella, which still are within the privy of the National Capital Region. So when Nortel went bankrupt, right, that talent stayed within Ottawa, I would argue, and this is why you had attraction of companies like Nokia and Ericsson and Sienna, and they all came converging to Ottawa. Why? Because the talent base that was left behind was still there, and having access to these kind of facilities also help matters. So that was really one of the distinguishing factor for the region, I would say. And there is a small park just 26 kilometers west of our office called Canada North, and Canada North is one of the largest tech park in the country. I don't know if you know this.
I've been there. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. Where the Sengen offices are, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Sengen's office is there.
That's right.
And you have about 500, north of 500 companies in Canada North, all in tech, and they generate around $14 billion to the GDP of the province and Canada.
It's a fantastic place. It's also a smart city.
It's a very smart cities, and they do have EV technologies being developed there, and they were the first place in Canada having 5G deployment when it happened. So yeah, indeed.
Yeah. See, that was worth my geek.
That was a side trip.
Yeah, you warned me. You warned me about my side trips, but yeah.
But I think that was great. So Sylvain, we know that you've been busy on your Canada tour, touring all sorts of research facilities at colleges, universities, hospitals, national institutes. But when you're not doing that, what does Sylvain like to do for fun? We always like to ask our guests when we end the conversation, what do you do in your spare time when you're not wearing your CFI hat? Obviously talking about Pure Play Foundry, but what else would you like to do?
So previously, before joining CFI and while I was at the University of Ottawa, the family and I wanted to live the dream, and we had purchased a hobby farm.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And the hobby farm, not because I'm a farmer, because my daughters, we put my daughters on a pony, but that was a mistake.
Don't do it, Mike.
Never put a daughter on a pony.
I have not yet.
And no, don't do that. And of course, one thing led to another, and so we had to purchase the hobby farm because it was too expensive to be boarding 2 horses, which became 3 horses, which became 4 horses, because at that point you have to join the group, right? So I bought myself a quarter horse, and I was the cowboy in the family, whereas my wife and daughters would be riding English and doing the competition. So yes, we did buy the F-150. Yes, we did buy the horse trailer. And yes, we did do the competition. My job was only to drive. to those competition. But we had a great time as a family, and since joining UC, but that is behind me now.
Okay.
But fortunately, and so I live much closer to Ottawa, to downtown Ottawa now. And as of October 1st, I joined a sports club. So 5 days a week, I will go to Good Life, which is 4-minute walk from my office, and I'm usually there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and go and do a bit of exercise before I start my day. So that's what I do in my spare time these days. Yeah.
I like the photonics by day, Yellowstone by night. That's an interesting.
Well, we do have Yellowstone parties every year.
Oh yeah, so you're a big fan?
No, of course we are.
I'm watching 1923 right now. It's,
Okay.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
I could see how my wardrobe's changing. I'm starting to buy a lot more period pieces, it seems sometimes.
But I was a cowboy before Yellowstone
cool.
started. Before it was cool, right?
Yeah,
So
it was
I
cool.
did have my cowboy hat, my cowboy boots, and my jeans. So yes.
So
I'm gonna buy some chaps.
a lot of wisdom in the episode, but I think certainly advice that I will take is do not put your daughter on a
Do
horse.
not put a daughter on
We
a
went to
horse.
Maple Hill Farms last year, and they had these mini horses. They weren't allowed to ride them, but they were brushing their hair. One of the horses' name was Choopy, and I would have bought it if it was for sale in that moment, but we resisted.
The only thing I'll say, Mike, is it's a very expensive hobby.
Yes, yeah.
It's a very expensive hobby. People talk about sailboats or boats in general, and hockey and soccer. It's off the scale.
Yeah.
I'll tell my wife that. She was upset about a gymnastics competition so we had to buy, and I said it could always be worse. So maybe we'll stay in this lane.
Yeah.
No horses, no barns.
Oh
Yeah.
goodness, yes.
Yeah. There's a saying that it's better to know a guy with a boat than be the guy with a boat. And I think that's probably true with horses.
True with the
too.
horses as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
In any event, Sylvain, it was really great to sit down and talk to you. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and we hope everyone enjoys the episode. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much,
No,
Mike,
thank
for
you.
hosting Mohammed and I.
Yeah.
It was a real pleasure to come to Cambrian and to see the wonderful facilities that you have to offer.
Awesome.
Anytime, doors open.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.